Hello, folks. Welcome back to WW2TV, and this is the 5th live stream today because I'm on something of a roll. So I want to be clear that we're not actually at the end of the 80th anniversary commemorations in Normandy. There'll be events throughout the rest of June, July, August, and then we will morph in Europe towards Market Garden and Hurtgen. But the big week is pretty much over now. The reenactors have gone, the jeeps have gone. Latest figures I was looking at today is they estimate between June the 1st and June the 8th, there were 3 million additional people in Normandy, which is absolutely insane. Crazy. So I'm going to go straight into some questions, but I want to explain about my ranting in the earlier videos from Villa Bocage about the Michael Wittmann and other German tank ace fanboy worship that goes on. So where does it come from? It comes from a variety of places. It comes from YouTube comments. Brad has it on OTD military history. There's always someone who'll pipe up and claim that we're misrepresenting the Germans, or that they weren't all bad, or that why don't you talk enough about this, that, and the other. But particularly, it's to do with this anniversary period. I've had a really great time. If you saw my reactions to the commemorations, I was really impressed with the tone. I thought it was really good, but there are a few things that annoyed me, such as photos I saw in the internet of British reenactors who were on motorbikes, but then at one point, one of them, I don't know why, wore a 4-pocket Wehrmacht infantry unit to have his uniform jacket to have his photo taken inside some bunkers. I stress he wasn't wearing a complete uniform, but he's wearing the wool grey 4-pocket tunic. And I'm like, well, just why? Why do you think it's appropriate at a commemorative period to walk around German Widerstandsnest with part of a German uniform on? And I saw a similar thing at Lafayette on June the 3rd. A guy, he was a member of the crowd. He was wearing jeans, but he was wearing one of the splinter pattern smocks and a peaked grey 1943 field cap. And I'm like, just why? Just why? What makes you think that's appropriate? Now, I'm specifying there's a difference between that and the organized German living history camps. If a museum in Normandy or one of the villages wants to have a dedicated area within a field, within their complex, to have reenactors, and within that they want to have a German display, I don't have a problem with that. I'm not entirely comfortable with it, but I don't have a big problem with it, because if you enter that environment, if there's a living history sign saying living history encampment, and you see it there, and it tells you there will be American, British, and German troops in the field, and you go in there, don't be surprised if you're going to see Germans, if you know that's what the event is. So organized living history displays, I don't have a particular problem with, but just wandering around in German uniforms or part German uniforms, just don't get it. But the big thing is, of course, it's of course to me, is the fanboy worship that happens at some of the graves, and particularly Michael Wittmann's grave. So Michael Wittmann is buried at Lacombe on the N13 highway between Bayeux and Carenton. And there are some very nasty people buried there. Diekmann, Adolf Diekmann, who is responsible for the Oradour-sur-Glane massacre, is buried there. And not that Wittmann is in the same plot as Diekmann, but he's there in that cemetery. And at this time of year, you see little toy tiger tanks, and you see wreaths. I've seen little porcelain angels put there. I've seen poppy crosses. I've seen all sorts of things put there. And I'm like, just why? I'm not saying remove him from the history books. I'm not saying to not use and study what his tank actions were in Normandy and understand they are part of the history there. But what on earth would make anybody come here and lay flowers on his grave? I'm just right, but that's why I get a bit ranty. I don't fucking understand why anybody who claims to be interested in World War II, an understanding of the terrible conflict and reading books, would ever want to lay flowers on that guy's grave. I don't mean you can't buy a book that covers his actions, because that's a different thing. But fan worship, I don't know who does it, Andrews. I don't think it's Germans. I just think it's all sorts of people. So I'll just stop ranting and I'll get on with some of your questions. I just saw this one come up. Are there remnants of the airfields? No, basically no. The ALGs in Normandy, the advanced landing grounds, are pretty much all temporary. So the runways were put down. Lots of the personnel lived under canvas. They occasionally took over some of the barns and buildings nearby, but we're not talking about a tarmac runway. We're not talking about Nissen huts and Quonset huts. We're talking about basically a camping environment. So once they've gone, all you see is the area where the runway may have been. And you see, as I said in the video this afternoon, there are less hedgerows because they had to clear back to make the runway. So you won't see anything else. It's not like the 8th Air Force bases in the UK where you see perimeter tracks and bomb pits and that kind of stuff. It's none of that. That's not the kind of that kind of deal there. So I'll go back to some of the questions that came in earlier. So this is a really good one, and I want to address this first. Stephen is asking, how do I see future commemorations, save the 90th and the 100th? Well, obviously they're going to carry on. I mean, obviously the commemorations won't end. They carry on commemorating the First World War. People commemorate US Civil War. They commemorate anniversaries of like Waterloo. What has been interesting about this one, I said this in my reactions to the week, is that there's definitely a feeling this time of a transition period to the veterans not being here, and that's why I like to see kids getting involved. And if you haven't seen that video, go back and watch it. So they will happen. I can't predict whether for the 90th, for example, the world leaders will be here then. I mean, for the 90th, there just won't be any veterans around. I mean, you'd have to be, it would be 107 minimum. If you were 17 on D-Day, you could be here for the 90th at 107 years old. But let's just say there are going to be no veterans. Now, will world leaders come when there are no veterans around? I don't know. World leaders every now and then will cover previous wars with commemorative events. I don't know. But they will happen. I think what's been clear about this anniversary, the 80th, is it's peaked in terms of size and scale and scope. Anything that happens in the future, I'm not saying it won't also be big, but it won't be as big. Okay. So there's a real sense of this is the one that is going to be the one that will be remembered as the peak anniversary. So I like the fact that we're morphing into the era when it'll be children, it'll be younger people, and the focus will be on the next generation. So that's something there. So changing the subject to other things. So I've talked about why I was ranting. Rich asked a couple of times about the Vida Stonzes in Omaha Beach. I'll be interested to know what number of Germans anybody watching this would think would be defending Omaha Beach. So there's 14, 15 Vida Stonzes overlooking Omaha Beach, and depending on exactly what you count is being the beach, because one or two of them are just inland a little bit. But let's say 15 Vida Stonzes. I don't think there are anything more than between 300 and 400 Germans manning those Vida Stonzes at dawn on June the 6th. A few others came forward from the inland positions, and there are, of course, other 352nd Division and other artillery units a few miles inland that are part of the Omaha defense. So with 15, let's say there's 15 Vida Stonzes, and let's say there's 400 Germans defending, but I think that's the upper end of the figure. That would put us at something like 25 to 30 per Vida Stonzes, but it's not equal because there are the Vierville-sur-Mer, and if you haven't watched the show, go back and watch the one with Michael Ackerman. The 3 Vida Stonzes at Vierville are counted as a Stutz point. So do you count the Vida Stonzes separately, or do you count the number in the Stutz point? If you're counting the Stutz point or strong point, there's probably maybe 60, 70, 80 Germans defending that area there, compared to maybe just 12 in some of the smaller Vida Stonzes. The point is, or one of the points is, it's not necessarily how many men are in those positions, it's what fields of fire they have, how much ammunition have they got for their weapons, in that, how many men do you need to be behind a machine gun covering a particular part of Omaha Beach? Those 2 men could in a sense outgun the Allies with only just 2 people there. So it's not the volume of troops that really counts, it's the fields of fire and the positions they have. And what we do know is that the Germans don't really have enough ammunition for a long fight. So after that initial onslaught, when the machine guns opened up on the German machine guns, opened up on the first wave, beyond that, the Germans have already spent a huge amount of their ammunition that they had stockpiled. And this is a principle that broadly applies to the other 4 beaches as well. Omaha is not unique in that regard. So that kind of does that. How successful were the German miniature tanks employed on D-Day? Do you mean the Goliaths? I think that's what you mean. The only beach I know where they definitely used them was Utah, and it didn't work. Basically, the wire-controlled system for the Goliaths just basically failed the Germans on D-Day, and what you actually see is pictures of American troops kind of playing around with them later on sometimes not realizing they were packed full of explosives because they were just playing with them. A friend of mine, Donald R. Burgett, who wrote the 4 books starting with Currahee, A Screaming Eagle in Normandy, he and his buddies are playing around with one up near Marmion Farm in Ravenelville, north of Utah Beach, and kind of playing with the wires, because there it was left operational by the Germans. It was only when someone pointed out to them later on, you do know that thing is full of explosives. They were just using it as like a dodgem car. But I don't remember being any deployed in Omaha Beach. Someone will correct me in the sidebar if I'm wrong on that. But the one I know about is Utah Beach, and basically they didn't work. Thankfully. The idea is, of course, we don't know what they are. They're about, I don't know, a meter long, half a meter wide, little tracked, like turretless tanks, packed with explosives on a wire control. And basically the Germans would send them out on a wire and detonate them under a tank, or under a vehicle or near a landing craft. But they very, very rarely, as far as I know, worked. Why were the Normandy beaches assigned the way they were? Why didn't you? Well, there are various answers to this. One is simple practicalities of where they started putting the American troops when they started arriving in the UK from 42 onwards. They tended to go down to the west of the UK, which meant that when the beaches start being assigned, it was easier to kind of move the Americans down from the west of England to the west part of Normandy, and the Brits were kind of more towards the east, and the Canadians as well go towards the east. That's part of it. Part of it is kind of a randomness of someone's got to go somewhere. The other idea is that the British have perhaps more experience, and they do that job, and this is more the Montgomery kind of argument of forming the hinge, holding and securing Caen as early as they can. And the Americans, who have more mechanization, more mobilization, more of that kind of thing, they do the sweeping up to Cherbourg at the western end and then swing down underneath. So that they're faster moving army, possibly, compared to the British and Canadian army, does that job there. So that's part of the reason there's a strategic reason to having the Americans over to the west and the British and Canadians over to the east. But there are other factors of the fact that when Frederick Morgan sets up the plan and they started looking at it, they were looking at air coverage, they were looking at which units are going to cover which naval ports. There's a lot of reasons. But what it certainly isn't is someone hasn't just drawn a picture of Normandy and pinned it to a dartboard and someone just thrown darts at it and go, oh, there's a little bit of kind of sort of randomness, but there has been some method in the madness there. So that's that one. I see there's, don't ask too many because I'm not going to be here for hours now. As I'm seeing there's like 55 comments I haven't read yet. An Ask Me Anything question: do you disagree with James Holland on any fundamentals of the D-Day campaign? Yeah, I'm more or less in line with James on most things. Probably 90% of what I think about, I think he says I'm in agreement with. That doesn't mean that there aren't the odd mistake in his book on Normandy. From my point of view, a mistake. I think I really applaud James for being part of the movement to downplay the German efficiency that was the big thing back in the 1980s when people like Max Hastings and Carlo d'Este were talking about how efficient the German army divisions were and how efficient they were and how they look at their spotty camouflage and look at their tanks, and the British were slow and cumbersome and the Americans didn't know what they were doing and the Canadians don't even get mentioned, blah, blah. That was kind of how we were talking about history in the 80s. And, you know, if only the British could have been as good as the Germans was kind of the message said back then. James is spearheading actually the Germans weren't that good and the Allies were really quite good at what they did, and the Normandy campaign wasn't slow and all that. My worry is that because of James, and he's got so much influence, he's a really good mate of mine, we're now beginning to dismiss the Germans completely. It's like swinging back too far the other way now. It's like, oh, everything the Germans ever had was broken down and they were hopeless. And that was no. I don't agree with the over celebration of how efficient the Germans were and the knocking of the Allies of being slow, but we can't swing it back to just say the Allies are brilliant, the Germans were useless, because that's not true either. The reality is it was somewhere in between. There were moments when the Germans were quite good at some things and the Allies were a little bit slower, and there are things that the Allies are good at, but we have, I think, unfortunately, in the era we live, a very binary way of looking at things. We can't just say, yeah, this general is quite good. He has to be either brilliant or awful. A German unit has to be elite or hopeless. An Allied unit has to be, and it's never, ever that simple. You know, there's always somewhere in between the two truths is where you are going to find things. So so I'm just reading this. I listened to a podcast the other day where one presenter was the Brits failed to take Caen due to the magnificent Whitman. Well, I mean, God, that's the kind of thing that just annoys me. You know, the failure to take Caen is much more complicated than blaming it on one Tiger tank in one street on one day. There's a myriad of reasons why taking of Caen was not possible within the first few days, not least of which road network, and let's not get into that. Yes, there was one airstrip near where the Americans. Well, technically, it's the other side of the E1 draw. So if you come down from Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer to come in from to the Rouquet or the E1 draw from the top, you start in Saint Laurent, you actually go past the monument to ALG7. I'm not sure which number it is now. AL2, ALG2. I don't know. Someone will correct me. But you see this. So there's a photo of a P-38 Lightning on that airstrip about 2 days after D-Day. So the other side of the draw from the American cemetery, but only about half a mile away, something like that. So yes, that was one of the first airstrips in Normandy. Keeping go. Did the Allies have any formal plan? This is a really good question. Did the Allies have formal plans drafted? Overlord failed? No, not really. I mean, well, when you say Overlord, are we talking about because Neptune and Overlord, slightly different definitions. You know, Neptune is the kind of the first step, and Overlord includes technically the Dragoon landings in south of France in August. They're not, the amphibious part isn't going to fail. Basically, I mean, despite the way some TV journalists have kind of angled it for the 80th of, you know, the peril of D-Day, what if it all gone wrong? The actual assault itself on D-Day, I'm not going to say it can't go wrong, but a hell of a lot would have to go wrong for it to fail. The Allies have stacked the deck again. You know, they've got lots of naval firepower. They've got lots of intelligence. They've got the deception campaign. That they've got this, that, and the other. And providing the Allies achieved tactical surprise on the morning of June the 6th, which we know they did. We know that it was a surprise to the Germans when they saw those ships coming towards them that morning, that they didn't know it was going to be there. Some Germans thought it might be Normandy and some thought it was Calais. But basically, we achieved tactical surprise. At that moment, it's kind of going to work, okay? The question becomes, how long will it take to get out of Normandy? How many lives will be lost? Will there be any, if it doesn't progress fast enough, will there be any, will there be pressure on Eisenhower to do, will people be calling for his head like people calling for the head of a football manager if they haven't, you know, got to the top of the league within a, you know, by October in the football season, that kind of thing. So that those kind of things may have come into play as the weeks went past, but amphibious landings rarely fail. And don't say Dieppe, because Dieppe isn't an amphibious landing. Dieppe is a big commando raid. It's not meant to actually gain a foothold. It's meant to go in and come out again. And yes, it didn't work very well, but it was not it was not the beginning of an invasion. The amphibious assaults in World War II, despite heavy losses, and there are places like, you know, Tarawa and Peleliu and Iwo Jima and Okinawa, where and D-Day, of course, where the losses in the first waves were high, but not beyond what was expected and anticipated and catered for. So no one's entertaining the idea of it failing, because it really it can't. Now, to quantify that doesn't mean there haven't been what I call urinal conversations, or Americans' urinal conversations. What I mean is, at the meetings at Schaeff and Cossack, you know, perhaps Monty's having a piss at the same time as Bradley's there having a piss, or Ted or something. I'm sure in their quiet moments, they're kind of saying to each other, what if this doesn't work? And the other one's going, well, I'm sure it will. I'm sure they've had some kind of thought about that, but really, it's just not going to fail. The amphibious bit is not going to fail. The Germans are on the ropes by 1944. If the Allies get absolutely stuck in Normandy, I mean, you know, just can't get out the beachhead, and you get like a 10 times worse than Anzio scenario, it could mean that the Russians or Soviets launch Bagration early, or they have more ambitious objectives, and maybe the Soviets try and push further west. But that's, you know, D-Day, Overlord, kind of not gonna fail. Okay, I'll go through and find some more questions. History Explorer, what was the most interesting thing you found while metal detecting? I've not really done much metal detecting. I gave up about 10 years ago, and for the record, it is a legal grey area in Normandy. Certainly, just going out and stopping anywhere you want and getting a metal detector out is completely illegal. Because I have a business here, I could get away with being part of the Patrimony de France. So if I found something, and first I always got permission of the landowner, that was imperative, and then I would also, if anything really cool came up, and I never found anything really cool, you consult the authorities, particularly if you find human remains. People don't. They find stuff, they just go, oh God, too much of a problem, and they just put the earth back in the hole. But if I had ever found human remains, I'd have got on the phone to the gendarmerie and called them and had them come along. I've just found, I was never looking for stuff. I was looking for clues about the battlefield. So if I would find a batch of spent German MG42 cases, that would help me identify where the machine gun was. Yes, I would take some of the cases home and kind of keep in the bag, and I would give them away to people here and there. But I never was a stuff collector as such. I mean, I just got, spent clips. But other people I know were doing it far more kind of professionally and found some really cool stuff. But for me, it was just shrapnel, spent cases. A friend of mine found a Bren gun, but I wasn't there. So I don't want to go too much on that one. How far in advance did the plan identify where to place temporary airfields? Pretty early. For the first ones, the ones near the beachhead, the ones to expand beyond would depend on how the campaign goes. This is all connects in some ways to the need to take Caen, because the area south of Caen, where places like Hill 112 are, that's your big, wide, open fields. If we had got Caen on June the 6th, I'm sure they'd have looked to build more ALGs in that area sooner, because some of the ones, the American ALGs particularly, they had to kind of cut down hedgerows. And of course, we've got the infrastructure to do that. We've got bulldozers and levelers and all that kind of stuff there. But there was some kind of perfect ground in the Caen area where you could just kind of pretty much roll a runway out and be up and running within almost a couple of hours, whereas some of the ones that they had to use involved a bit more leveling. So the live stream I did today from Elon, it took them about 8 days from the moment they began to commence the airfield to having it up and running to landing Mustangs, and it was Mustangs for reconnaissance and Spitfires and what have you there. So pretty early they identify what areas would be suitable, and that also connects to the fact that they've identified lots of things in advance. They've identified water sources, wells, underground reservoirs of water. They've identified which bridges will be suitable for big armor divisions to push in. Now, there's a hell of a lot of planning got involved into building up a 2D and 3D picture almost of Normandy, so that when the advance goes, you're not going to be able to predict exactly where the Germans make their stands and where they hold their lines. But there is this database of, well, that road network's good. So a huge amount of information about what was inland of the beaches. How easy is it to predict the Normandy tides? Very easy. I mean, you can look up the tide, low tide and high tide, months and months in advance. I have an app on my phone, so when I'm planning it, I don't do much guiding, but I just I can look 2 months in advance and find out what time the tide is going to be. One of the interesting things that I found is that people think that automatically, because June the 6th is the anniversary, it will be low tide at 6:30 in the morning when they came in. Well, I think this year it did actually fall quite near to low tide at the time, but some years on June the 6th, because of the way tides work, it's actually high tide in the morning. And people have often said to me, oh, well, I'm going to go out at low tide at dawn on June the 6th on the beaches. And I go, but it's not low tide this year at 6:30. Low tide isn't till 10:30. But tides, and don't ask me how the hell tides work. It's to do with the moon and all that kind of stuff, and gravity and the rotation and all that stuff. But yes, they can. You can download tide tables months, possibly years in advance. It's all maths, as I would say in English. So keep going down the questions. With current satellite tech, I think Overlord would not be possible anymore, as a description wouldn't work. Deception wouldn't work. I don't know. I mean, everything is changing if you're trying to plan an amphibious landing. I mean, even just keeping it secret, someone would blab, wouldn't they? Someone would just, as soon as someone got the D-Day plans, they'd go and do an exclusive interview with a newspaper and tell everybody, I think I know where the invasion is going to be. I don't know, the deception. you can't. I don't think you can basically compare the way the world is now with the way the world is then. Information traveled differently, but it's a good question. Would funnies have made any difference in the progress on Omaha Beach? Possibly. Peter Caddick Adams addressed the whole myth that there was a myth going around for years and years that the Americans were offered lots of spare funnies, and there were spare funnies sitting. I think it was in Tilbury in Essex. They had various petards and Averys left there, and that they offered them to the Americans, and the Americans said, no, we don't need them, we've got Sherman's, thanks. Well, that's not the truth. The Americans and British are working in conjunction. The DDs were transferred between the different nations, technology. It was decided that by the time the British found themselves in a position to have some spare funnies, because don't forget they're building stuff and constructing stuff, day in, day out to get enough stuff. By the time they realized they've got enough spares, there weren't enough British crews to crew them on the American beaches and British vessels to get them to the American beaches, Omaha. And there wasn't enough time. I think I'm remembering this correctly from PCA's book. There wasn't enough time to get the American crews up to speed with using new types of tank, new types of tech. So they just didn't go with it. But there wasn't a snub. But would they have been useful there? The way, because the length of the beach, maybe the petards, the flying dustbins, you got to get a long way up the beach before you're close enough to a bunker to hit them. Maybe that have helped. The bridging ones, maybe getting over the seawall. I mean, possibly. I don't think it's suddenly an ace if the Americans had 20 Hobart's funnies. Suddenly Omaha Beach is miraculously cured. I don't think that's the case, but maybe made a bit of a difference. But I will keep going down. No, they weren't. That's another myth. I'm going to be doing a show on that at some point, and forgive me for not explaining all about that. This is a ridiculous myth. I don't know where it kind of came from Scots who hated the English or something, but there's this idea that Churchill and others deliberately this is 1940 in France, deliberately sacrificed the Scots and not the English in this futile thing it's just no truth. I'm not going to go into any detail. This is an 80th anniversary of D-Day, but no, it's not. From my opinion, it's not true. The decision to keep the 51st Highland Division there was not any kind of slight. It wasn't racist. It wasn't let's leave the Scots to die. It was. That doesn't mean that some of the men who were left there didn't feel some anger towards high command. But this whole idea that it was Churchill deliberately sacrificing the Scots is bollocks. That's a good question. Were there really 85 machine guns at Omaha Beach given such a small number of Axis troops? I don't think so. No, it's the figure that always gets. I don't know where that figure came from. As Niels was explaining the other day, things got said in early post-war books that then just got repeated. There's a few dozen machine guns down Omaha Beach, probably 30, 40, 50. They're not all MG42s, but that doesn't mean that there are no MG42s. There are a variety of Polish, French weapons, MG34s, MG42s, but I think 85 is higher than the number. There you are. So I don't think that. Go down the sketch. Where did the names Tobruk and Belgian Gates originate from? Tobruks, as I understand it, in the fighting in North Africa and, of course, in the siege of Tobruk, you have the communities there going back centuries had these kind of domed, circular kind of grain storage silos that when they were damaged and the top got knocked off by artillery, you ended up with this kind of circular bit at the bottom that you could kind of go inside and put your machine gun there. It kind of became a purpose-built bunker. And so when the Germans started incorporating these into their Atlantic War designs, it reminded people of these things they had seen in places like Tobruk. And so they said, well, they just adopted the name Tobruks. That's what I understand. The truth is there. Someone, I'm sure, will add more information to that. The Belgian gates, because they were made in Belgium. Very simple. The Belgian gates were a Belgian road defense to stop the Germans invading in 1940. Clearly, it didn't work. Neither did the French defense or the Danish defense or the Norwegian defense. That's Blitzkrieg. That's another story. But the Belgians would have them anchored to the entries to their country, and the Germans went round them by lots of other methods and landing gliders on Fort Eben, Mayal, all that kind of stuff. And later on, the Germans recycled them and used them on the Normandy coast and built other ones. I don't think all the ones in Normandy were the ones just the ones the Belgians had constructed, but they saw the idea and thought they could be used. So the Germans are recycling stuff like the Czech hedgehogs. The Czech hedgehogs are because they were a Czech design along whichever Czech border it was sometime earlier. If I could be involved in making a British movie about the Normandy campaign, would there be a particular story you'd like to cover in that movie? Oh, I mean, the Falaise Gap, probably, but that would be British, Canadian, Polish. I'd like to see something following one of the British units, so either infantry, one of the DLI units, or the Sherwood Rangers, or 24th Lancers, or one of the Royal Tank Regiment units. So following them even from North Africa through Italy, Normandy on, or maybe a Hill 112 movie. That would be quite cool. There's so many ideas for movies, but it's not going to happen. So let's not get our hopes up for anybody coming along. Richard Attenborough has been dead for 15 years, whatever it is. I don't think movie makers will be lining up to throw millions at a movie about the British in Normandy. So we can dream, but of course, one of us might win the lottery, but I can't see it happening. Didn't know you knew Don Baguette. I knew Don Baguette really well. I've got, just stay there. On my bookshelf ahead of me is this rock. Now, you're not going to read what that says there. Maybe you are. Found 2008. So if you read Coureur Screaming Eagle in Normandy, you will read about up in Raveneville, the defense of Marmion Farm. He and his buddies in A Company 506, there was a ditch running on the side of the road coming down from the north. And over the night of the 6th, I suppose it was, to the 7th, they were defending there. And Don thought that this ditch, which went up towards the German lines, was a potential area for German counterattack to kind of crawl down the ditch. And so he and his buddies went to spent ages gathering up all these stones and built them into a pile in the ditch. Well, long story short, in 2008, when Don was over with his grandson Jacob, and there's now a big, I think it's a raspberry bush over this bit where the trench was, and Jacob volunteered to crawl into the ditch. And it was hot. He was sweating, and under the raspberry bush in the ditch, he found the pile of stones that Don had put there. What that was 70-something years earlier, 60-something years earlier, and he pulled up several of the stones from it. And I kept one as a souvenir. So I wrote on it in marker. You can see it says there, part of a wall built by Donald Baguette in Raveneville in June 644, as written about in Coureur Screaming Eagle in Normandy. So I have I have one of Don Baguette's rocks there. One of my less interesting, but interesting to me, souvenirs. So there we are. Okay, going down the monument. The questions there. Do you think more monuments will continue to be erected? Yes. Do I think they will incorporate interactive technology? I hope so. You're starting to see Q codes come into them. Of course, that will be only as long as Q codes, because something else will come along later on. But there are monuments going up. I know there's one being built now in Fontenay-le-Panel to Operation Martlet, that I'll be seeing when that is unveiled. So I know it's still part of the 80th, but I can't see them stopping putting monuments up, because people will be writing books, getting further and further down into the weeds, the detail, more and more regimental, divisional, battalion histories, and people will be using, Google Earth, all these things to get refine and add to their details. So we will be pinpointing locations that we knew vaguely about more and more. So that's where we used to say, well, the tank was knocked out somewhere near here. People in the future were saying the tank was knocked out here, right here, because they'll have done the ground penetrating radar. They'll have looked at aerial photos and they're able to say it was knocked out there. So you'll see more and more monuments going up to things like that. This person was killed here. This tank was knocked out here. So yes, that's going to happen. First time getting to Normandy is a dream. Can't decide which top three D-Day things to see. Omaha, Pegasus Bridge, and Pointe du Hoc. Pointe du Hoc is less cool than it used to be because of the restrictions to the visitor access. You have to go through a particular walkway now. It was much cooler a few years ago when you could walk over the whole site. But of course, it's still a good place. Pegasus Bridge, of course, fantastic. Omaha, but notice that you've said going to. I'm not picking on you, Graham. You're saying going to Normandy is a dream. And you're talking about D-Day sites. As I'm always saying, D-Day's first chapter. 76 more days of fighting. Get inland, get to Hill 112, get to Avranches, Cherbourg, Saint-Lô, all these places, these pivotal actions that were happening in the days and weeks that followed D-Day. It's not all about D-Day. Obviously, there's lots of cool stuff on D-Day, but there's lots of cool stuff inland as well. It's got you firing away with the questions. I don't know how I'll be able to do all of these. Had the idea of the Kangaroo been developed prior and available, would they have helped on D-Day? Possibly. So Kangaroos are the APC's, armored personnel carriers, where you whip the top off a Ram tank or Sherman tank and basically stand people in where the turret would have been. And they use them particularly in totalized and tractable. I think the difficulty would be with the number of LCTs. People talk about the requirement of all the landing craft they needed for D-Day. And yes, they do. But people, I think, have felt that means the LCVPs and the LCAs, the infantry coming. The big requirement is for LCTs, so landing craft tank, to bring in 4 armored vehicles, so 4 Shermans or 4 self-propelled guns, sextons, priests, that kind of thing. And we're still short of LCTs. So to get Kangaroos onto the beaches or into the early stage, you need to put them in LCTs. So if you've already got LCTs full of Sherman tanks and dozers and the funnies on Sword and Juno and Gold beaches, where are the LCTs going to come from for the Kangaroo armored personnel carriers? So it's not about just having the Kangaroos, it's about having the ability to get the Kangaroos to the beach. So there you go. That's my answer to that. So half answer to that question there. Yeah. Oh, and there were Italian pre-war pillboxes in Tobruk that also were borrowed by the Germans. So it's not just the kind of the Arab-built buildings; it's also the stuff Italians had built. Yes. Do you have any great books, collections, and maps commercially available to use as a guide when traveling through the Normandy beaches? If you have internet connection, the Project 44 is your go-to. So Project 44. So be careful what you Google, because there's a transport company called Project 44, but it's the Project 44 mapping site you're looking for that has the whole of Normandy and much of the ETO, and you can plot divisional movements, regimental movements, all that kind of stuff there. That if you've got online connectivity, or you can, that's really good, or you can download a certain amount of stuff in advance and take screen grabs. I use a lot of the French one. Let me see if I can get one. I'm going again. Hang on, bear with me. Can't find it. Oh, yes, I can. I use the IGN series, and you can order these online. You can order these via Amazon. Now, they don't have necessarily monuments indicated on them, but they're the 125. Yeah, that's the way, right? 125,000 scale maps, the 1 centimeter, 250 meters. This is one of the ones I'm using for the book I'm writing about now, about the area in La Haye de Puy. They're expensive. They're like 8 or 9 euros each. And to cover the whole of Normandy, you'd need like 20, but they are invaluable as a resource to go. And then there are the books, of course, the Battleground Europe books, the Battle Zone books. They're really good. I realize I'm speaking very fast. You must think I'm on some drugs or something. I'm just very excited this week. I don't know what it is. What happened to the landing craft after they were no longer needed? Well, some of the landing craft in Normandy get used later on. They're used for Walcheren in Netherlands and other operations. They're used for ferrying stuff back and forth. Others were recycled, other theaters. Some just got scrapped. Just didn't need anymore. Some of the things like the Buffaloes or the Amtraks, they used them for river crossings later in the ETO. So, but lots of landing. I can't remember if any landing craft from June 44 went off to the Pacific. I know ships and transports did, but I'm not sure whether any landing craft did. Someone will probably know that. And I don't know everything. I'm not the font of all knowledge. Do you think the primary reason for allocating beaches was the fact they didn't want the convoys in the UK to cross each other? Yeah, that's kind of what I was implying, really. Although that doesn't mean they couldn't have switched the troops in advance. They still could have feasibly moved all the American troops from the west coast to the east coast, and and vice versa. But definitely the avoidance of fleets and armadas and flotillas crossing each other was a huge consideration. One of the interesting myths is that the Piccadilly Circus, you see the map where they show the Piccadilly Circus bit, they designated the middle of the channel as a sort of big naval roundabout. people are under the belief that that was in place on June the 6th, as Stephen Fisher, the venerable Stephen Fisher, has worked out. That wasn't put into place until, I'm not sure when, but some days after D-Day. The Armada used different navigating and routes on June the 6th. How do the beaches get their code names? They are random. If you haven't watched it yet, watch the myth show that proves once and for all that Juno Beach was never ever going to be called Jelly Beach. That's nonsense. Basically, there's big list of random words, and when you need to give something a code name, you take another name or set of names off the big list. And what happens is they tend to get named at the same time. So when they were naming the American beaches, there was obviously a list of place names, and among them happened to be 2 American place names. But I've read all sorts of spurious and curious things where they've said, oh, well, the general's dogs was from Omaha, or his gran had a holiday home in Utah or something. The point is, you don't want to put any connection towards an operation to what it means. So let's say I'm going to plan the invasion. My football team is Ipswich, and I'm going to plan the invasion of Norwich, my rival football teams, and I'm going to call that something because I'm the general in charge. So I'm going to call it Operation Muffin, which is the name of one of my cats. Okay. Now, I'm using this as an analogy. Now, the people of Norwich know that at some point the people of Ipswich are going to be planning an invasion. They're looking to build up an intelligence picture about when and where this invasion is going to come, who might be leading it, what they're going to do. And if they happen to hear radio traffic where someone refers to it as Operation Muffin, then they might look through their information and go, General Woody, he's got a cat called Muffin. He must be the commanding officer of this operation. So you see how they've got a tiny bit of information that they can build on. So a code name has to have ideally no connection to the person who gives it the name or what the operation covers. The exception for Normandy is Pluto. Pluto which is not an operation, but it is a code name, is the pipeline, the under-channel pipeline. So it's an acronym. It's pipeline under the ocean. So that's one of the few times that they gave it a name based on something. There's also a theory that the Mulberries, the code name for the artificial harbors, there was a pub opposite the building where the Royal Engineers or somewhere developing the caissons, and it was called the Mulberry, but I don't think that is true. But people look for things, they look for coincidences afterwards. So I'm sure if you looked hard enough, you'd be able to find an officer involved in the 3rd Division who collected swords or something, or had a pub called the Duke of something where there was a picture of a sword, and it was that's why it was called sword, because Colonel so-and-so had a whatever. You can always find these connections afterwards, but that doesn't mean they were known about. Does that make sense? So I've talked about an invasion of Norwich, so I'm really going on. How well known is the Normandy-Niemen squadron in Normandy? Probably not very well. So if you don't know what that is, look it up. It's a fascinating story. I don't know much about it at all. I'll be honest, but it is the French fighters in the Eastern Front. So these are French people who fought in the Eastern Front. That's how I refer to it. So it's quite well known to some French people. It's not really part of the Normandy story, although some of the French came from Normandy, but it's not. Yeah, but it's an interesting one. Look it up. It's go there. So keep on going. Marks and Sparks. How would I rate these museums? Utah Beach, Omaha Beach, Arromanch, Pegasus Bridge in terms of content and education. And I really liked Utah Beach and Arromanch when they were last week. So, well, the Utah Beach Museum is very good because it covers the push up to Cherbourg. It also covers airborne operations, and it doesn't try to over cover other stuff. So that's becoming a trend in Europe, is that where a museum now has to have like an entry bit where it explains the background of the war, who Hitler was, what happened in 1939. And I'm like, I don't need that. If you've got a museum at a historic site, start the story kind of with that historic site, but there's a feeling now to always have the background. So Utah Beach doesn't cover Omaha. It doesn't cover the British beaches. It covers Utah Beach. Now, Omaha Beach, of course, there are, including the Visitor Center at the American Cemetery, including the Big Red 1 Museum 2, then there's the Vierville-sur-Mer Museum 3, the Saint Laurent Les Moulins Draw Museum 4, and then there's the Restored Civilian House 5. There are 5 museums on Omaha Beach. Overlord 6. There are 6 museums overlooking Omaha Beach. So it's not just one. So they all offer slightly different things. The Overlord Museum is a big fuck off collection of armored vehicles and gear. It doesn't necessarily explain the landings in detail, but if you want to see hardware, that's really good. The Saint Laurent Les Moulins, which I think is called the Omaha Museum, it tells the story of Omaha Beach. It's a little bit old-fashioned, but lots of photos of veterans and personal reminiscences. The one up at Vierville in the old Quonset hut is another collection of stuff. It's some people like it. If you like stuff, it's pretty good. The Big Red One Museum, run by a mate of mine, Pierre Louis Gosselin, is a specific to his collection of First Division items and the people he knew and all the stuff he dragged off the beach. It's a really good museum, and you're supporting an individual who's making huge efforts to tell the story. I haven't been to the Arromanches Museum since it was redone, so I can't comment on the new one. Mag has been there. She says it's great. I've heard some people who say they don't like it. So, you know. Robert's question: if the invasion was defeated, I don't think the invasion could be defeated. I don't think it's a viable. I just don't think it's going to happen. It can be slowed down, but I just don't think the Germans can stop it. It's just going to happen. It's just going to work. You can argue with me, but I just don't think it stands. It can't not work. It can work with more casualties, and it can work with less of a link up, but it can't not work, in my opinion. How many foos were on each beach for naval? I don't know the numbers. I don't know what. I know there were. Stephen Fisher talked about this in the Sword Beach show a couple of nights ago. Forward observers had some of the highest casualty rates on D-Day. David Gower's, the cricketer's great uncle, his father was on HMS Swift and his great uncle was a forward observer, or the other way round. But his two brothers, one was a forward observer, killed inland from Sword Beach, and the one on HMS Swift survived, or I forget which way around it was. But forward observers are a high casualty rate, and that presented problems with communicating to the ships, because if you lose the forward observer and you lose the radio, you've lost that connection. So they would have liked to have had afterwards. You read this in some of the reports. They would have liked to have more observers, more people with radio contact. You get on the Omaha, for example, you have cases of people on the beach kind of picking up any old radio set and trying to get in touch, unofficially with the ships behind some of the destroyers and just kind of improvising a fire plan. So I don't know the numbers. So someone said there is a picture of a Goliath on Omaha. Possibly. I don't remember. No, we're going back to the little vehicles full of explosives. I certainly don't remember reading any accounts of them actually working on Omaha, but there may have been a couple found there. Does anyone know more about the Italians? Well, they would have been the same Italians that were in Normandy. They were mostly prisoners. They were ones that the Germans took as prisoner after Italy capitulated. They were particularly used in things like catering, truck driving, and construction, and a few in anti-aircraft positions. So I forget the number of Italians in them. There's a couple of thousand, I think, were up and down. So they were military, but they were kind of in low grade kind of construction support roles. So they're not in Italian infantry. They may have been Italian infantry in the past, but they're now kind of construction workers, basically. For a first-time visitor, the must-see sites. Well, this is these are how long it's a piece of string questions, because there are places I could take people to where I could stand and talk for half an hour, 2 hours about something, but without knowing what happened there. It's just a field. So if you haven't done much prep and just read a couple of books, then stick to the museums and things like that where you have the explanations for you. If you have done the prep, then there's lots of places in Normandy that are incredibly rewarding. For me, you need a few days. To even get to grips with D-Day, you need 2 or 3 days. And if you want to start covering inland, a week. I've been here 23 years. I haven't seen it all yet. But it's one of the questions I get all the time is, where shall I go in Normandy? Well, where you should go on your own is different to where someone would take you on a tour, because any of the tour companies, Ledger and Stephen Ambrose Tours and World War II Museum and all the other independent guys like MAG, they will take you to places that you would not stop at. You would drive past it because it would just be a field. you know, or a monument. But if the historian can explain something to you, it becomes more interesting. So there's places that have an interest, but you don't need to know about it in advance. So it's there for you. So there's a museum or there's information about panels saying this happened here. Look over there. There's the map. Then there are other places that don't have that tech, so to speak. So but yeah, a few days minimum. Yes, there is a Goliath in the Utah Beach Museum. I know Graham Hollands. I haven't spoken to Graham for a few years. But I used to know him quite well, but he's not sort of retired now. But I'm not guiding much. Our paths have not crossed for a good 3 or 4 years, I think. But yeah, I know Graham. Communications and signals are under discussed. I want to do a whole series of shows eventually about radios and how they work, and comms and links and Morse and all that kind of stuff, and shortwave and long wave. And it's not something I know a lot about. You've got all things like Phantom GHQ Liaison Regiment, who are using high-powered radio sets to send information back to London, and you know, King George VI and Churchill. There's all sorts of things about signals that I have not yet covered, but it's a massively underdeveloped area. The Signals Museum in the UK, I think, is in Blandford Forum, and it's got some really good examples and explanations about how the hell radios work and all that stuff. Allied tank cases. The thing is, the Allies don't have a system that encourages tank cases in the way the Germans do. The same with the Air Force. You know, you can have an incredibly well-known American Marine Corps Corsair pilot with 15 kills, and that would be a lot for Allied pilot. A tank ace in Normandy, an Allied tank ace, may have knocked out 3 or 4 German tanks. For the Germans, that's, you know, allegedly some of their tank aces got dozens, hundreds of kills, because their system is catered to inflating these figures for their propaganda. Whereas the British, it's about the team. The Canadians, it's about the team. So it's about how many German tanks has this regiment knocked out in this action. It doesn't matter whether Sergeant Smith got 3 or Sergeant Johnson got 3. What matters is that were the German vehicles knocked out. So the Allies don't have the system for that. What was the attack ratio of D-Day? There's 160 odd thousand Allied troops landing on the beaches. There's the tens of thousands in the naval ships. There's thousands of pilots in the air. The Germans have. It depends how you define on the beaches. I mean, we at the worst case scenario, we outnumber the Germans kind of 3 to 1. At the highest ratio, we kind of outnumber them 6 to 1 ish. It depends where you define your distances, in that there are Allied personnel who are nowhere near the actual landing beaches, but they're on ships. Look at the minesweeping operations happening left and right. And there are Germans who are, you know, a dozen miles inland of the beaches who aren't directly involved in the repelling the invasion, but are they part of the defensive force? It's how you define your parameters. Dennis, was it really a failure to take Caen quickly, or a failure in terms of expectations being set by Monty? Yes, the Normandy campaign heads up ahead of schedule. It's very complicated because Montgomery moves the goalposts during the war and in his post-war memoirs about what he was ever intending to do. But what the figure we tend to not talk about when it comes to Caen is Dempsey, commander of Second Army. So Miles Dempsey. So Miles Dempsey had landed a corps in Operation Husky in Sicily, and his corps had got, at the end of that day, in July 43, they had got about 14 miles inland. I've said this on World War II TV before. So when he is now commanding Second Army, so he's up a grade in D-Day, but a lot of the men below him had been with him in Husky. He wanted to set the same expectation level as what he'd achieved in Husky. If you achieve 14 miles inland in one amphibious landing, and you've got another one coming up, set the same standard. Well, we're going to get to 14 miles inland. So it's Dempsey's influence. And Caen comes within that 14-mile expectation. So the analogy I would use, using football again, because I love my football, is if your team that you support wins the league and wins the cup in this season, then you don't start the next season hoping to come third and hoping to come to the semi-finals. You hope to win again. So Dempsey is naturally wanting to set the same standards he had set earlier, and Montgomery kind of part of that. So the whole Caen thing gets very complicated, and basically it also comes down to what is meant by taking Caen anyway. Does it mean getting a single infantry soldier, his foot, over the northern city limits of Caen? Does it mean that? Can't just mean that. Does it mean getting into the city of Caen? Again, one person, a division. How many people do you have to get there before you have Caen? What it really means, what Caen really must mean, is having the city and the high ground beyond it with enough of a force to defend it. And that is never going to happen on June the 6th. You're never going to get 20,000 men and hundreds of armored vehicles south of Caen on D-Day with a defendable blockade around that city to hold off 20, especially when you've got 21st Panzer, the only German armored division actually in the beach area on D-Day to deal with. So what is meant by Caen? It's a very complicated subject, but what is certainly not unfair is people talking about Sword Beach as being a failure. Sword Beach was a successful landing. The whether or not they should have got to Caen, whether or not it was a realistic possibility, is something historians have been debating and will continue to debate for forever. Keep on going. How long have I been doing this? Nearly an hour now. It's not going to keep on going for too long. Do you have an advice for an aspiring tour guide for the Normandy region? I'm 5 years from retiring from the military, and I've been looking leading staff rides for years. It's very complicated. It's not as easy as it used to be. More and more red tape, and I don't say that as a bad thing. The main avenue for becoming a professional tour guide in Normandy is to get the French Guide Conférencier qualification, which enables you to guide in historic buildings like the Church of Saint Marie and things like that. That doesn't mean there aren't other routes in there, but the big problem is the taking of paying customers inside a vehicle. That within France you need to have a transport license, and that is very complicated. I'm not going to spend any more time talking about it here because it's not what we're here for. But you can't just turn up here, and make a poster with Sharpie pen and say, I do tours of the beaches, and sellotape it to the side of your car and just start taking people around the beaches. No matter how much knowledge you have, that isn't possible. You could kind of get away with that 2 decades ago and people didn't say anything. But now there are rules and regulations. It's a regulated industry, and it's better that it is a regulated industry. Going down here. I'm going to space to breathe for a bit. I don't hear much about the Piste Anglais at the Saint-Côme de Friend. The sign there claims a large number of troops and vehicles left the beach there. The church was the first one to ring. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Saint-Côme de Friend is kind of just on Gold Beach. The sign claims a huge number of troops that left the beach there. Yes, I mean it's. Oh, I know what you mean. Yeah, kind of the pier there. Yeah, that's kind of post June the 6th. It's part of the kind of the general unloading plan of mulberries and stuff like that. Yeah, sure. Don't the Belgians still have a bunch of engineers still looking for World War I munitions? Yes, there's lots of. I know you'd said it's not for me, but I do get the question a lot about unexploded ordnance in Normandy, and our mines still felt. And is there not much? The iron harvest of the Somme and Ypres is a very from a different war. The First World War was much more concentrated in certain areas, so they're still finding stuff. Normandy, always being asked, do they still find unexploded mines? Not often. What does happen reasonably frequently, like once every couple of years, is a fishing trawler off the coast will pull up a sea mine in its nets, and bit of a kind of panic, and then they call the right authorities and kind of halt the boat, and the authorities come along and dispose of it. The odd unexploded grenade and stuff gets found in hedgerows, but only really if you're looking for it. I mean, you'd have to be going and digging and using a metal detector to kind of the chance of you walking around the field and blowing yourself up on a mine or an unexploded bomb is nothing's ever zero, but it's very, very low. So that's an interesting question, even though it wasn't for me particularly. The British need to talk amongst yourselves. And don't forget, while I'm looking at there, don't forget to click like and subscribe and do all that kind of usual stuff. And please consider becoming a patron. Oh, this is a good one. what is the latest take on Churchill's attitude towards Neptune? Was he hesitant or not? Hesitant is a fair word. Churchill was haunted by Gallipoli in 1915 from the First World War. He has quite affection for France. He kind of got on well with some of the French leaders, and Anzio hasn't gone entirely perfectly, and Churchill always has some reservations about the risk of kind of putting all your eggs in one basket and going full in for Normandy. But the movie with Brian Cox and Miranda Richardson that says that, implies he was kind of trying to stop it happening and was a real, spanner in the works and being a real fusspot and pacifist, and is taking it to a way more of an extreme. Churchill definitely had his sort of soft underbelly of Europe going up through Italy kind of focus, but he had some hesitation about the validity of an assault into France. But basically, by the time the people like Montgomery and everybody else outline the plans, he gets fully on board behind it, and is a willing and an active part of the push towards getting it done. So he had been hesitant, but he was not a naysayer. He wasn't out there trying to undermine it, going, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing this." That's people take it too far. The flight paths of bombs on D-Day. Bombers is an interesting one. So the two, not talking about the British and Canadian beaches for a bit, which is a sort of slightly separate subject. The 9th Air Force and the 8th Air Force are assigned a beach each. It's not quite that simple, but that's kind of basic way of looking at it. So the 9th Air Force, a tactical Air Force, get Utah Beach in the west, because there are more 9th Air Force bases towards the west of England, and the 8th Air Force get the Omaha Eastern Beach, and they are a strategic bombing force. And then the 9th Air Force, because Utah Beach is some distance away from Omaha Beach, it's about 15, 18 or so miles by road and a good 9 miles by sea. And because it's at a different angle, it's got north-south beach as opposed to east-west, the other 4 beaches, they decided that they could have a parallel to the beach flight. So the twin-engine bombers of the 9th Air Force that fly down Utah Beach, and it's Bostons and Mitchells, they're able to fly at reasonably low level, because being a tactical air force, they're kind of used to flying at a reasonably low level, and they can fly down south, down the coast, and then turn off north again back to England before they get anywhere near Point du Hoc and Omaha. And the bombing on Utah Beach was pretty successful. The 8th Air Force bombing Omaha Beach, there's just no way you can bring in hundreds of 4-engine bombers and have them go along the beach, because the turning circle would be massive. You'd be either over Utah or you'd be over Gold. And the 8th Air Force, with their bombers, are not used to the low-level stuff. So they have to go at much higher altitudes, at 14 to 17,000 feet, something like that. So they decide to come straight across the beach, perpendicular to it. And my analogy is, if you're trying to drop a bomb on a piece of string, better to fly down the string and drop a bomb, because you've got multiple chances of cutting that string. If you fly across the string and try and drop a bomb on it, you're never going to hit it. And that's my string analogy. That's not the string theory. That's to do with nuclear fusion or something, isn't it? Or quantum mechanics. Like, this is Woody's string representing a beach theory. So the air plan has different levels of success on different beaches depending on the units involved. But I have heard some people get very, very grumpy about, oh, the 8th Air Force fucked up on D-Day and didn't hit the beach no more. No, they didn't. They didn't. I'm not saying they did. The 8th Air Force, however, flew lots of missions on D-Day. Some of people like Rosie Rosenthal, who was in Masters of the Air, he flies, I think, 4 flights on D-Day, or certainly it was 3. To expect the 8th Air Force at the altitude they were flying across the beach to pinpoint targets below them that are 20 feet wide, which is what you're talking, a maximum size of a German bunker. They're at this point, despite the supposed brilliance of the Norden bomb site, they're struggling to hit rail yards in Germany and industrial areas of several miles across. At the height they were, they're really not likely to get any of the beach defenses. A friend of mine used the analogy, it would be like trying to drop a penny off the top of the Empire State Building and get it into a milk bottle at the bottom. That's the kind of accuracy you'd need to actually start taking out individual strings of barbed wire and to brooks and bunkers. So it's a technology the Allies had. and it didn't work. I personally, and some people disagree with me, I personally would have liked to have seen the 8th Air Force use its fighters on D-Day rather than its bombers, use its P-47s and P-51s and bring them in at low level and try and get rockets in some of the bunkers at Omaha Beach. But some people say, no, that wouldn't work, Woody, for various aviation reasons that I am not, as familiar with. But that's, to me, the using fighters couldn't have worked any worse than the bombers. The bombers didn't work. So for the fighters to have been equally as bad would seem to be unlikely. So I would have used the fighters myself. Has anyone ever done a tour of where the RAF base defense sectors, RAF radar units were in the Normandy campaign? Probably not. No, that'll be something on your list to do. I don't expect anyone's done that. I certainly haven't done that. So there we are. Let's go down there. If the nearest Panzer divisions, 21st, 12th SS, were released straight away towards the beaches, do you think the invasion would have failed, or would they have been countered by the warship's guns? Yeah, probably, but they did come into the range of the Navy. There was a bit of an advantage that some elements of the 12th SS started going off the wrong way on D-Day because they'd heard reports of what later turned out to be the Canadian parachute battalion guys landing up near Le Havre, and I think one of their regiments started heading towards Le Havre. They were based in the Lisieux area, 12th SS, and then realized, oh shit, wrong way, and they came back. Although there were allegedly a couple of 12th SS observers, officers in the Juno Beach Sword area who should have theoretically got on the road and said, come this way. The thing is to mobilize a tank division, move it with. You saw the show with Dilip earlier. There's that blue area inland the beach where Allied fighters are roaming. So even if the 12th SS had gone straight towards the beach from Lisieux, they're going to be trying to move straight through the blue area where there are Spitz and other Allied aircraft roving over it. So they're not going to get there without suffering casualties. And if they don't from the air, and if they get towards the beach, they're going to come under the naval guns. And the 21st were, well, the Lear are too far away. They're 300 miles away. 17th SS were a little bit closer, but they didn't get to Normandy till June the 11th or till near the beaches, so they're never going to get there in time. But the only way the Germans can make a significant dent with their armor divisions if they hear about the invasion a week before. Then they've got assets they could free up and move towards the beaches. But once the morning of June the 6th happens, once it's, and this whole thing about Hitler being asleep and he didn't release the panzers, even if he was up, even if he hadn't gone to bed that night and was up and he sends the panzers towards the beach immediately, it's still not enough to make a difference. With what the forces he had, as you mentioned there, they're not going to be able to move with enough speed. They're not going to be able to do anything, and they're going to come under Allied fire before they get, I think. Do I have a favorite memory with D-Day vets? I mean, too many. Too many amazing memories with D-Day vets. I knew so many legendary figures. I've had a beer with Richard Todd and John Howard and Jim Walworth, the glider pilot, Don Malarkey, Wild Bill Gunny of Easy Come. I have memories with those. Some of the North Hants Yeomanry guys who fought in Operation Totalize. Some of those guys, Gold Beach vets. They're not all kind of instant recall in my brain, but there'll be something that will remind me of something. I'll be reading a book and it'll kick off and I'll remember one of the incredible memories I had. Keep on going down there. Thank you for my great work. Yeah, thank you for saying my work is great. It was nice to have met you at Lafayette. One question: is the seawall at Utah Beach still covered beneath the sand? There's not that much seawall left now because one section of it was taken away a few years ago to the World War II Museum in New Orleans, and I think that was one of the more uncovered bits. But if you walk north from La Madeleine, where the museum is, and you get towards the red roofed house, depending on what situation, because the dunes move about all the time, depending on what the tide does. The best time to see more stuff is around the spring or autumn equinox, when the tides are very strong and it kind of rips back, and then you're more likely to see some tank wall. There's also an intact bit of tank wall up in the Merville area, and that's Merville, Franceville, the coast area, not the Merville battery area, where there's a 122 meter, but it's part of a campsite. You have to pay permission to go to the campsite, but there's an entire intact bit of seawall up there. And they're all on the same time zone, basically. People get very carried away about different time zones. Everyone's pretty, as far as I understand, everyone's pretty much on the same time zone. What's my thought of the VSM British Memorial? Okay, this is quite complicated. I like it with some woody reservations. I like the fact that finally there is a central place to acknowledge the British losses in Normandy, and I love its vista. I love the view it has. I love the kind of metal sculptures representing each of the 5 beaches in front. I like all that. I like the fact that they listed names. What I wish there was an explanation, and maybe there will be when the visitor center is finally finished, of how they define their parameters, because it is complicated setting your parameters up, because they count from the June the 6th to September the 10th or something as their cutoff dates for being killed in the Battle of Normandy. Now, if you follow the channel, and you will have seen the show from a couple of years ago with Matt Bone talking about the RAF Typhoons that coming and knocking out the radar installations, and there were 75 of them along the French and Belgian coast. I think the Allies have knocked out 63 or something by typhoons flying in at 60 degrees and 400 miles an hour, effectively coming in. But some of those radar stations were knocked out on June the 5th, and then some on June the 6th. Now, if you were a Typhoon pilot killed on June the 5th, you are not on the monument. If you were killed on June the 6th, you are. Now, I understand you can't go back too far. I mean, you can't start including pilots who died in 1943 because that's too early. But I think there should be some explanation saying, this is how we've decided on our parameters. For all those soldiers who fall outside of these dates, we owe a debt of thanks. Please consider their sacrifice as well. The men who died in training in England, for example, are not on the monument. Now, I'm not saying they should be listed there. I'm saying there should be something to reference the fact that that list of names cannot be complete in the sense of having contributed to the liberation of Normandy. Does that make sense? So, explain you've got a system. Explain we're not going to have the June 5th dates, but here's why. But we honor those who fell on June the 5th. I hope that makes sense. Now that probably not, Dennis. So the ABMC cemetery gets more visitors than any other American Battle Monuments Commission cemeteries around the world. It gets more visitors than any Commonwealth War Graves cemetery. Something like 2 million people go to the American cemetery every year. And for the last few years, the plots are nearly always roped off. Sometimes they open up the back to allow visitors. Most of the times when you go there, they are roped off, and people get very grumpy about it and say, I've come all this way. I want to better walk among the graves. I'm not defending or the ABMC as such. I would like to draw your attention to what their remit is. If you go to the ABMC website, their remit is to look after and maintain the graves of those who fell and provide access to next of kin. That's their basic parameters. They don't have, they are not duty bound to provide access to the rest of us, especially in the numbers that are going to the American cemetery. And by access, I mean by maintenance, they're talking about keeping the grass intact. They're talking about keeping the bushes, the graves intact. So I think it's a pity that visitors can't walk among the rows, but I understand why they have to have the situation. I'd like to hope that there can be a solution where they can find a means of rotating the area, or providing some different type of grass blend or something, or I don't know. But for the time being, I don't think we're ever going to go back to the years where you could walk in there and just walk around all the plots. And I'm being very careful to not criticize the ABMC, because I think those organizations like the Commonwealth War Graves are doing fantastic work, sterling job. And it's basically, we're going there in too big a numbers. That's the issue. And if everybody just walked across the grass, when they was open, there was always a brown patch of mud in front of Teddy Roosevelt Jr.'s grave. And this is rather, in some ways, it's our own fault for taking advantage of the situation. It's our own fault for going over to certain graves. Tour guides have been responsible for this, in that tour guides have taken people over to the Nyland brothers, or some of the Medal of Honor recipients, Distinguished Service Cross recipients, or Teddy Roosevelt Jr. If we hadn't been doing that and had spread our visitors around the entire cemetery, we wouldn't maybe be in a situation now where they're worried about the grass. People are lazy. So tour guides, some of them have been taking people to the first few rows in plots A and B, so the grass there gets more worn, rather than walking another 10 minutes down the cemetery and going to the plots at the back. So it's kind of our fault in some ways for taking advantage of the way it works. Does that make sense? So lots of roped off now these days. So I'm trying to go through biography of Robert Cole. I don't know about that, but I do know there is going to be a new book on the 502nd, which is of course his PIR. I won't tell you who's writing it now because I don't know that he's made it public, but if you've read his previous books, it'll be a doozy. Yes, Michael Ackerman was supposed to be on this week, but there were some issues at his end calendar wise, so he's got 2 shows lined up on the Widerstandsitz 62 area. Just a question of getting it scheduled, because I've got so many shows coming up. It is sites that I wish people would see: inland. I can't say it enough. Get inland. The Falaise Gap is massively undervisited. There are some groups I just saw Paul Reed in the sidebar there, who have been taking groups inland for years and years. Ledger are leading the way in that regard. So many tour groups just focus on the beach. Ledger, hats off to them, have been taking people inland for a long time. The tank battles, Fontenay-le-Penel, Tilly-sur-Seine, Villers-Bocage. But yeah, get inland. I'll try and go back through some questions there. They're coming in so fast I can't read it all. There's some odd ones there I'm not going to get out of. Did I know any BOB vets before the series came out? Yes. Well, I knew of them. Don Baguette's book had come out about the A Company 506 back in the 60s and 70s, and I was aware of some. I think the first E Company veteran I was aware of, it wasn't Bill Gunn. It might have been Buck Compton, because some of these, or Lipton, because they had been writing stuff for the 101st Airborne Screaming Eagle newsletter years earlier. So I hadn't met any, I think, before the series came out, but I was certainly aware of some of the Easy Company guys before. Did the Germans make it to the coast between Gold and Omaha and withdrew? They don't think they made it to the coast. There were some German Widerstandsitz and some of the inland positions in the Mauvain Ridge inland from Gold Beach that were still problematic, even the next day, sort of. But I don't think any got there. There might have been some cut off in the beach defenses. What's your take on the Merville Battery now? Complicated. I have mixed feelings. I think the museum is very well done. It's very slick. The parking is good. The interactivity is good. It's a modern museum, but I don't like the fact they built the hangar on the attack route. That leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I don't really see the point of having a C-47 that flew the 101st Airborne over at Merville, but I suppose it is a C-47. So I kind of a mixed bag about the Merville. There are things about their museum I like, and things about it I don't like. What's your favorite Canadian themed YouTube channel that covers Normandy? Well, it's not yours, Brad. No, it is yours. OTD Military History, of course, is doing sterling work promoting and telling the Canadian story, amongst other stories. If you have not subscribed and consider becoming a patron, go there immediately. Look it up in YouTube, OTD Military History. Do that. There were some other questions, but I can't find them again now. The Germans and British are the same people. Why do they have to fight? Why did the British invade? We didn't invade France. What are you talking about? The Germans invaded France. We call it an invasion. We're invading the German defense. We're not invading France. We're trying to defeat the German army who are in France. And what's this same people nonsense? Are you some kind of weird racist? What are you going on about? What's same people? Talking about us being white? Don't get into this idea that it's a white battle. There are people of all different colors serving with the Allied nations on D-Day. Don't turn this into something it isn't. The British did not invade France. The British were trying to defeat, along with our allies, were trying to defeat the Third Reich, one of the most despicable regimes the world has ever seen, who happened to be occupying France. That's why I invaded. Rant over. Did the Allies decide to bring aircraft carriers to Neptune, ordered to cycle aircraft even faster than flying. But there just aren't enough aircraft carriers to bring up to the EGO. Aircraft carriers, as fast as they're being created, are sent to the Pacific because of the distances. Because England, the southern part of England is a massive, great aircraft carrier. You don't need aircraft carriers when you've got an aircraft carrier there. Aircraft are needed in the Mediterranean, and they are needed in the Pacific, where you have to take your air force to the enemy. And hence, the whole island hopping campaign in the Pacific is about taking the air force closer and closer to Germany, so we can get the B-29s in range of Tokyo, etc., etc., etc. I've answered most questions there. There was a comment from any comment on US commanders criticizing Montgomery about reverses attempting to break out the Caen sector. Yes, he claimed he tied down. This is complicated because Monty did change his story, but then he wasn't the only one who changed his story. Bradley did two versions of his autobiography, or rather, his wife did a second version. Montgomery is not the only senior commander to change his story and bend with the breeze as the years pass. The Germans did it, the Brits did it, the Americans did it. Montgomery gets a whole lot of undeserved flack because he's a bit prickly and very British, and I think he's a difficult person to like. And but it's complicated. That's a good one. How extensive was the German naval defense around D-Day at the port of Cherbourg? Lots of German batteries up near Cherbourg. If you want to see what the Germans could do with the Atlantic Wall in this area, Cherbourg is the place to go. And Jersey, the Channel Islands. The Germans put like 30% of all their concrete into the Channel Islands. So the Allies didn't bother to go. It's like, you put so much stuff there, we're not going to go there. The poor Channel Islanders weren't liberated till May 45 because the Germans had made the Channel Islands so well defended, we had to kind of bypass them. But lots of gun batteries up near Cherbourg, some of which are accessible today, some of which aren't. None of them have the guns inside them, as I'm thinking. Oh, God, there's some real nutters. Why does D-Day matter? Blah, blah. I'll just fuck off. I'm going to block you right away, you arsehole. Just idiot. You're getting blocked. Ban, use, and delete their comments. So, God, I've really drawn some crazies tonight, haven't I? Good grief. Is it because of my ranting about Wittmann that this word got out amongst the Werraboos to come and have a go at me? Wankers. So let me have a look at the questions. Block them. Yeah, exactly. Montgomery did a pretty good job. He won. Exactly. Under schedule. The Normandy campaign, the projection, it wasn't a prediction. It was a projection of 90 days, and it came out under 77. So yeah, there we are. What do you think of this? Hello, James. What do you think the centenary of D-Day will look like? Well, hopefully I'll be here to live it. I'll be 75 then. So I'd like to think that there'll be some special section where they rope off all the elderly historians and talk about, without those historians, bridging the gap between the veterans. And I'll be the one, people wheeling us around in our wheelchairs to the celebrity roars of the crowd. The historians who paved the way with history, me and James Holland and Paul Reed, I'm being facetious, but I hope I'm here for it then. It'll be different. It'll be different. I think we're moving more towards a celebration than a commemoration, because there'll be fewer and fewer people who even had a relative killed in D-Day. So time heals wounds. People don't get upset when they go to Waterloo, particularly. People don't really care about the French dead and the German dead and the British dead and the Russian dead there, because they do care but they can look at it in a more clinical, how did the battle unfold way? What did Napoleon do? What did Wellington do? And I guess that will eventually happen with D-Day and World War II. People won't have that. But my grandfather was killed there. My great uncle was there in my case. So I think when we get to future anniversaries, it'll be much more. We'll be able to celebrate the liberation, and there'll be more of a clinical appreciation and understanding of the battles. But we won't, it'll be different because there won't, be those people around who have a personal scar from the battle. That will be in the past. There we go. I look like Tommy Robinson. Oh, why don't you just, because I'm wearing a hat. I think you're that same person. I blocked you about 3 or 4 times in the last few days. Just piss off. You're not welcome here, you idiot. Fuck off. Just blocked. There we go. You tell them, Paul. I agree with you there. They're roping it off entirely, going back to American Cemetery. It creates not only a physical and emotional and psychological distance. I understand. I completely understand that. And I'm sure the ABMC people are looking at how they can move on long term and find a better solution. It's only at Normandy where it's an issue. The other ones, you know, you go to the Luxembourg, Margraten, places like that, you can easily get into cemetery. It's just Normandy gets too many people. Love Angry Woody. I don't love because it's my blood pressure. I've been an hour and a half. I'm gonna have a sip of water. Just excuse me. Was there a similar war crime of British soldiers? Yeah, the massacres by the 12th SS were not exclusively of Canadian soldiers. Some of the soldiers killed at Ordieu, some of the soldiers killed nearby were British. It's not like the SS were going out with a remit of looking for and particularly finding Canadian soldiers, just that the Canadians happened to be in the way of the 12th SS and bore the brunt of their reprisals. But if you were in the way of the 12th SS and you were an Allied soldier, you could get murdered. So the British soldiers murdered, and there we go. So yeah, you're right, Paul. The Battle of Sully is really interesting. I know people have done some work on that because you have the Chateau de Sully and you have the village of Sully and the Manoir de Sully, and the actions occurred, as you know, across the various locations. I think over the years, some people got a bit muddled as to which things happened where, but there's work being done into the South Wales borderers and the Essex and the Gloucesters and the area there. So there's some really cool stuff happening there. Just a pity at the Sully Hotel, they rendered over some of the bullet holes on the facade of the building a few years ago, which is a bit annoying. Was the 12th SS under orders to do so? I don't think it's under orders. It's just their fucking ideology. It's just that their officers in the 12th SS are some of them are former first Adolf Hitler Leibstandarte SS, brutalized by the Russian campaign, where murdering people that got in your way was just commonplace, and they come to Normandy with the same attitude. The junior ranks are 18 years old, brainwashed with a Nazi mentality, and it's just part of their ideology. Human life is not considered the same way as other soldiers, and that's not to say that every German soldier had that, because of course that's not the case. But the 12th SS were particularly nasty sons of bitches. And there's Hemmerves, which were Americans who were killed by not the 12th SS but other Germans, and Gagne. So I'll carry on. I'm good to see you too. Was it Thursday? Is that a week ago? It was a week ago, wasn't it? God bloody, it was Pegasus Bridge, wasn't it? Yeah. So a good book focused on the planning of D-Day. Peter Caddick, Adams, Sand and Steel, the first half, is all about the planning for D-Day. So that's really good. I would recommend that. I'm going to kind of bring things to an end. That's an interesting one. I'll say that. The cool questions keep coming in. Why was 21st Panzer Division such a hodgepodge unit when it came to its equipment? Because it hasn't been upgraded. That's what happens, isn't it? It's the football team that 5 years ago, all its players were world superstars. 5 years on, they're all in their early 30s and they're losing their legs. And that's basically the 21st Panzer. They had been really good in North Africa and other places, but they have not been upgraded. They have not had Panthers and latest. So lots of French Marders and self-propelled guns and a few Mark IVs, and they just haven't had the upgrade. They were better, and now they're not better, and that happens with lots of units in wars. They start off being with the frontline equipment, the best equipment, then new equipment comes in that replaces what they had, and all the armies are doing their best to bring all their units up to speed. But it takes time, and you also have to adapt the fact that you've got lots of men trained on one type of vehicle. They're not robots. You can't just instantly plug in a USB stick and reprogram them for the new bit of equipment. You've got to train them on it. So you look at the American 2nd Division landing on Omaha Beach in the reserves, who are, a lot of them, you've seen the photos, have got the Springfield 03 rifle. Why? Because that's what they've been used to. And they were offered the M1 rifle like weeks before D-Day, and I mean like 2 or 3 weeks or something. And the general, whose name escapes me, said that we're not going to fade. What we'll do is we'll bring in the new guys. The new replacements will come in with the M1, but these guys have been training for X number of months with the Springfield. We're not going to just suddenly give them a new rifle and hope for the best. It's anyone who's been in the military will know that new kit takes time to get used to, and new kit tends to come with problems that need to be ironed out. So sometimes having the older kit but knowing how to use it is a better resource than having the new kit and not being able to use it. Does that make sense? And there you go. So yeah, there's a chateau, there's the manoir. We're getting into the discussion of the Battle of the South Wales borderers and the area of Sully. We're talking, for those you don't know where we're talking about, this is the, if you take the road from Bayeux north to Port-en-Bessin, where the Pluto was, we're talking about kind of halfway up that road is the Battle of the 56th Independent Brigade moving south towards Bayeux. Are there any more episodes on the second Sino-Japanese War? Eventually. This year, I'm trying to cram in as much 80th anniversary stuff as I possibly can. So I don't think there are any Sino-Japanese War stuff this year, but I'm only young. I've got lots of things for the future. I've said this before on the channel. When I get to the end of 2025 and we start 2026 and we don't have 80th anniversaries to cover, I can go back and look at, you know, the Finnish War and the early 41 and Crete and Greece and the Sino-Japanese War and go back and re-examine the Pacific campaign and the Barbarossa and all the things, because I wasn't streaming prior to 2020, so I didn't really cover much of the 80th anniversary of 1940, and in my first year I was still picking up and finding my feet. There's lots of stuff I'll get back to and do later on. I'm gonna leave it there because less is more sometimes. Is the Canadian contribution to D-Day overrated? What are you talking about, Grant? You seem to be quite provocative. No, it can never be overrated. The Canadians are punching way above their weight. Look at their population. Look at what they're taking on. Look at the fact they're not just fighting in Normandy. They're fighting in Italy. They're fighting elsewhere. They''ve got representatives in the Air Force and Navy. If anything, the Canadians are underrated. They punch way above their weight. They get some of the furthest advances on D-Day. They're dealing against decent German armor divisions from the first day and onwards. They are integral to the taking of the Channel ports later on in the campaign. They're the Scheldt estuary. No way is the Canadian contribution overrated. I'm going to start singing, you know, "Oh Canada." I don't know. I'm not going to start singing "Oh Canada." If Norma was here now, she'd punch you in the bracket. It's no. There are certain units within the Allied armies that get too much recognition. That is absolutely straight up. You know, we talk a little bit too much about Pegasus Bridge and Merville Battery at the expense of the 3rd Parachute Brigade and everybody else doing the other stuff on the Breville. We talk a little bit too much about E Company 506, myself included, at the expense of all the other units there, because that's the way stories are told. You have to use the hooks. And the fact is, there are certain units that will bring people in. So Pegasus Bridge on the my Pegasus Bridge live on June the 5th is the most popular one I did last week. Why? Because it's got Pegasus Bridge in the title. Paul Reed, you know, when you're planning itineraries, you know, you have to hit those things that people recognize: Pegasus Bridge, Merville Battery, Brecourt Manor, you know, Omaha Beach. And then once you've got your customers, once you've got your readers, then you can expand. So there are certain units that get a little bit more attention than others, but then that's the job of the historian to spread the attention out fairly. But no, the Canadians are absolutely not overrated. They are underrated, if anything. So let me have a look at some more questions, then I'm going to go on. Thank you for watching the video about the Italian camo. That's very kind of you. That was a fantastic show by Gareth. Yeah, Easy Company is definitely overrated. That doesn't mean, and they're all volunteers. Well pointed out, Paul. The Easy Company thing is complicated because I got to know Bill Garnier very well and Don Malarkey and some of the other guys, Ed Shames, Earl McClung, went drinking with those guys. Providing people consider it as an entry level, a gateway to more history, I have no problem. I can give you a list of historians in their 30s who were teenagers when Band of Brothers came out, who are now contributing to our field of history. Whereas people in my age group and Paul Reed and James Holland, it was comics and TV shows like Colditz and Pathfinders, and that got us interested in the Sunday afternoon movies. So Band of Brothers has been an incredibly important kick up the backside to get people interested in World War II. What worries me are the people who just don't step outside that bubble. All they want to hear about is how great Dick Winters was. And Dick Winters is a product of the American or Allied training of officers. There are hundreds of Dick Winters in Normandy. You find officers of his caliber in the South Wales Borderers, in the Welsh Regiment, in the 59th Staffordshire Division, in the 501st, in the 6th Airborne, and in the Canadian 1st Hussars. He's not exceptional. He's only exceptional because he's famous. So there we are. So I'm thinking, I keep saying I'm going to stop, but I really am going to stop soon. But the questions keep coming in that are really cool. So I'll just try and find another one or two, then I will stop because did the Allies do any lessons learned reviews within months of duty? Yeah, the Allies are always learning. Not always fast enough, and sometimes it takes a while for the lessons to actually filter down to need them. But the Allies are self-examining themselves throughout the war. Even the Soviets are looking at their deep war and thinking, well, how can we make it better? So yeah, they're not always learning the lessons quickly enough, but things like combined arms and air-ground cooperation and communications between armored vehicles, they're always looking at what works, what doesn't work. And then they're also taking the ideas beyond the war. You look at the amazing infantry school reports that are mostly written in 1947 by American officers who are looking at battles like Montcastre and the crossing of the Hergen Forest and that, and saying, okay, we did this worked quite well, this didn't work very well, here's where we could learn some lessons from this, here we could improve this, here we could do this. So the Allies are always learning. Again, perhaps not fast enough, but here's the thing, if me and Paul Reed were sitting in the pub right now, or Colin was joining us, and you hand us some World War II battles and say, make that one better, you just say, well, don't do that, move that armor there, yep, made that one better, next, ting, and it's easy to do it with hindsight. It's easy to do it with hindsight. Some are more complicated now. There's Market Garden, there's still things that, you know, but it's doing it advanced, and the Allies are very good at learning. So let's I started with Michael Wittmann. Let's go. Yeah, Sidney Jarry. Yeah, he, brilliant. I mean, what an amazing officer. If you haven't read 18 Platoon by Sidney Jarry, it's a very brief. You can read it in one night. It's a fantastic book, about a platoon commander's experience in Normandy. Fantastic. It's taught at Sandhurst. It's just an incredible. What's the biggest Allied mistake on D-Day? I don't mean we won, didn't we? I mean, there's still always improvements. There's maybe a bit more knowledge of the currents, maybe some more fire amendments and improvements to fire plans. The flight paths could have been improved, but we won. We came under with fewer casualties than predicted. So of course it worked. Why was it there weren't massive French African units involved in Operation Neptune? Because they're elsewhere. The French are coming ashore. The French expeditionary force is in Italy. It's fighting there. It's been there since January, February time. They're doing sterling work out there. The French Second Armour Division is been out in North Africa. They're going to be coming ashore later on. There's other French troops in Operation Dragoon. There are plenty of French troops. There aren't any left for Normandy. Neptune, they're elsewhere. That's pretty simple. There was one I saw there. They're good lists. Come on yourself and talk about it, Jake. Good ideas. There's lots of fantastic ideas. I think they're both on my list eventually. There was one I saw a minute ago and I can't find it now. It's about Ed Shames. Ed Shames was really interesting. I had a lot of time for Ed Shames, although he could be very prickly. He liked me a lot. He used to call me. On my television. He's one of the few people who just call me out the blue. And I can't do Ed Shames' voice, but whenever I watch the film Gettysburg, General Pickett to me sounds like Ed Shames. Ed Shames was from Virginia, actually Jewish by religion, but he had that kind of Virginia gentleman speak. So when he spoke, and he called me sir in a kind of way that only people from Virginia could do, but kind of with a hint of British because he's kind of hard. But I really liked Ed, but he could be very prickly and very outspoken and you know, a legend. He was one of the advisors on the Israeli insertion in the Egypt with the radar one in, was that 67 or 72? He was involved in that. He was an amazing guy, Ed. His book didn't do him justice, and I can sit and entertain people at length with some of my hilarious Ed Shames stories that I spent time drinking with him. He was a cool guy, but complicated. The Omaha plan could definitely have been better, but it still worked. And still, you know, came under under the casualties they were predicting. It's a successful amphibious landing. I mean, the first wave is always going to get it bad. You know, attacking a enemy-held coast is never going to go without casualties. And the 800 to 1,000 deaths on Omaha Beach sounds terrible when you say it like that, but 30,000 men landing that day, 1 in 30 killed. It's terrible, but it's acceptable. It's not a disaster. Omaha, yes, of course, the plan could have been better, but you needed to have the tactical surprise and all that kind of stuff. There was something else I saw there, but I can't find it now. Would I recommend to move to Normandy as a first home? Yeah, I love it. I miss, there's things I miss about England, the trivial things. It's, you know, different flavour crisps and sausages and going to football, banter. I miss just stupid kind of dad joke banter with people in shops in the street. And you know, I know you know, my French is okay. I can't have that banter level kind of crack, as Irish would call it. Not that's crack, CRAIC, crack meaning banter, not crack as in crack cocaine. But you know, I love it. But to make the go of it in France, you've got to get to grips with the language at least to be competent here. Yeah, there's things about France I don't like, but I don't envisage myself moving back, at least in the next few years. But I'm gonna stop now. So yeah, and yeah, it might be more time for some moderators. Picket played by Stephen Lang. Yes, that's right. I've got a signed copy of the Gettysburg book with Stephen Lang's signature in it. A friend got me that. For that, right? I'm stopping, but banning someone else, racists. What's the point of coming on here and being a racist? You know I'm going to block you. You know, and by the way, folks, I'll end with another rant. The more emails I get telling me stop using female historians, I will use them more. Okay, the more people say, you know, you're being too tolerant, the more I'm going to be more tolerant. You're not putting me off. You're making me want to do it more. So if you're one of the wankers, the fuckwits who sends me an email saying, you shouldn't be using women, women have no right to talk about World War II, well, fuck you. Because women have absolutely every right to talk about World War II. So does anybody. So does the LGBTQ community, because World War II was everybody's war. Al Murray said it on his interview on the One Show on June the 6th from Aramonch. He said, World War II came to everybody's doorstep, right? Okay? Doesn't matter where you were or what age you were, what color you were, World War II pretty much came to you. Maybe there are some parts of the jungles of South America that weren't particularly affected by World War II, but most of it was affected by World War II, okay? So if most parts of Africa, most parts of Asia, most parts of everywhere affected. So World War II had white people, brown people, people of different shades, gay people, trans people, all of them are fighting. And the more you tell me to not do that, the more I'm going to just keep on doing it. So fuck you, right? I had someone say, I don't this an email I got the other week. Someone said, I don't appreciate the fact you have a voice to gay historians, right? Okay. There's one particularly show I did about Fighting Proud with Stephen Bourne, about the gay soldiers in World War II. So I emailed this guy back, and he said, I won't be watching shows with gay presenters. And I said, well, he said, I watch your other shows. I said, well, you will have watched shows with other gay presenters. We just didn't talk about it. So I messed with this guy, right? Because he now knows that there are other shows on World War II where the presenters were gay or non-binary or bisexual, whatever. But no, my blood pressure is fine, Brad. But now I like to think I've messed with that guy, because I now want him every time he sees a show to think, is that the gay person? Is that the gay person he's talking about? Well, because fuck you, right? What on earth should that have anything to do with someone's ability to talk about World War II? So there you go. Right. So telling me off just makes me want to do it more. Okay. So I want more women historians. I want more people of color on the channel. It's finding them and having them come on. But I want more. So there you go. Right. So, and if you don't like that, you're not welcome here. Right. Okay. So you're not, if you think the World War II should be talked about by white middle-class males, yes, there are a lot of white males talking about military history, and they form a huge part of the dynamic of my viewers and my guests, but not exclusively. Anybody's welcome here to talk, to watch, and to listen, but just don't be a git about it, okay? Don't come on here talking about too many people there. I'm not an expat, I'm an immigrant myself, okay? Okay, I didn't arrive with all my belongings leaving a war zone into France. I came and I began working. And so don't you start going on about this, that, and the other, right? It's the message that's important, not the messenger. So I'm stopping now. No ginger historian. Now that has made me laugh. Okay, but there you go. So I'm going to stop now because I'm going to get really, really, really grumpy. Yeah. So yeah, who cares about the personal life of a historian? Some people are crazy. Yeah, lots of people are crazy. The wearaboos and all that. And I've had people saying, "Why don't I have David Irving on?" Well, he's not doing very well health wise. So whatever. But you know, I wouldn't let a convicted Holocaust denier on my show. Okay. So there you are. I'm going to go now. Right. It has been great talking to you. We'll do it again. In the meantime, don't forget to click like and subscribe and watch some of the stuff. I'm particularly want people to go back and watch the 8 live streams I did on June the 6th. There were some really good discussions there. The one with Michael Nyberg. I've got such a man crush on Michael Nyberg. Here we are talking about LGBTQ. And I'm in there should be another initial, MN, LGBTQ MN. MN is initials for having a man crush on Michael Nyberg. So I've got such a man crush on Nyberg. No historian gets me to just fanboy about Michael Nyberg talking about the Allies in France. So that's a great chat. Garrett Graff talking about his new oral history was a fantastic show. Sasha talking about the 37th Troop Carrier was a fantastic show. So go back and watch them. I'm surprised they haven't got more views. I'm gonna go now, and there we are. So more diverse guests on World War II TV just to piss off the racists and the bigots. That'll be good. Cheers, everybody. I'll see you again next time. It's Paul Woodadge for World War II TV saying enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers. Bye.